So I figured I would record myself playing some Civilization 4. Some of you may have played Civ 5 or Civ 6. This is, I think, the best in the series. It's the older one. The original Civ 4 came out in 2005. There was an expansion, Warlords, in 2006. And Beyond the Sword came out in 2007. I normally play a couple of the mods, like Rise of Mankind, The New Dawn, or Realism Invictus. But I have played a lot of the base game, and just in the interest of not having tons and tons of extra stuff in the game, I'm going to stick to the base game for the first recording. But I also want to do something fun and interesting instead of just doing something random. So I'm going to be playing an unrestricted leaders game, and I'm going to be playing as the Sumerians. And the Sumerians are particularly interesting because they get this unique unit, the Vulture, which is a replacement for an early game melee unit, the Axemen. Now, the standard Axemen has 5 strength and gets plus 50% against melee units. But the Vulture is different. The Vulture gets 6 strength and plus 25% against melee units. So it's an interesting replacement because it's actually worse in a fight against another nation's Axemen, right? 50 times 1.5 is 7.5, but 6 times 1.25 is 7.25. No, is that right? I can't do math today. Actually, I think they're about equal. But it's exactly the same at first. Once you start adding other bonuses, once you add, which one is it? There's a melee shock. Once you add shock, 6 plus 50% is less than 5 plus 75%. So a lot of early game fights between Vultures and Axemen will end poorly for the Vulture. But the reason the Vulture is such a strong unit is that it's actually better against like archers, which are the standard city defenders. So Vultures are actually quite good for an early game attack, assuming I get access to copper or iron. And I might not. The downside of playing Sumeria, one of the problems with Sumeria, is that their leader is actually pretty bad. Gilgamesh is not great. His traits are creative, which is plus 2 culture per city, which is really good for new players, but it doesn't help Sumeria at all. And protective, which improves archery and gunpowder units and makes walls faster. But Sumeria's unique unit is really good for offensive play. So Sumeria is a low-tier nation. It's really not that good, which is a shame because I really enjoy the flavor of playing as the Sumerians, the first major civilization. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be playing with unrestricted leaders, which means that I can use any leader with any nation. I'm going to be playing the Sumerians, but instead of Gilgamesh, I'm going to be using Hammurabi, who's actually perfect with Sumeria. His traits are aggressive, which is a free promotion, combat 1, which is the first level of the promotion, for all melee units and gunpowder units, and double production speed of barracks and dry dock. Now, this is really important, double production speed of barracks, but I'll wait to explain why until after we get to that phase of the game. The other really important thing with Sumeria is their unique building, which goes really well with Hammurabi's trait, Organized. He gets half off on all civic upkeep, which saves quite a lot of gold over the course of the game. And he gets double production speed of lighthouses, which they're useful for coastal cities because they increase food on water tiles. Factories, which are late game, they're also quite handy. And courthouses. Courthouses are essential. They cut down the maintenance on each city by half. And so in the early game, you don't want to build a bunch of cities because the maintenance cost of cities is not linear. Every time you make a new city, the city has its own maintenance cost based on its size, but it also has a second type of maintenance cost based on the number of cities in your empire. So if you go from 4 cities to 5 cities, the maintenance cost of all 5 of those cities will be higher than each of the 4 before. And if you go up to 6 cities, your maintenance costs will skyrocket. And you'll get to a point where you won't have the economy to continue with research, and you'll end up falling really far behind. Because in this game, trade is split between science and gold, and later on it'll be split between science, gold, culture, and espionage. But I don't typically use the espionage or culture sliders very much. But notice, courthouse requires code of laws, which is not a particularly late technology, but it's not a very early one either. It's one of the things that you go for after you get settled down. And so the typical pace with a nation is to get 4 or 5 cities up, and then go for code of laws, and then put down courthouses in your cities to lower maintenance so that you can afford to get more. But the really nice thing about Sumeria, notice the courthouse here is 120 hammers, which is a reasonably expensive building. But if I go to the ziggurat, not only is the ziggurat cheaper, it's got 90 hammers of cost, but it also comes from a different tech. This is a really unique building. Most unique buildings are simple replacements. They work like the old building, but they have some extra ability on top of them. Like the Roman Forum works just like the original building. If we go up here, the Forum works just like the market, costs the same amount, it goes from the same tech, but its bonus is great person birth rate. Otherwise, it's completely identical to the market. But that is not the case for the ziggurat. The ziggurat comes from priesthood, which is a much earlier technology. And so the combination of Hammurabi with Sumeria is that you get aggressive vultures, which are significantly stronger. After you get combat 1, you can take cover with only 2 experience on the unit, which is plus 25% versus archery. Once you have a barracks up, every single vulture that comes out can leave with combat 1 and cover as soon as it leaves the city, which means it actually can win fights against archers inside cities, which makes the initial attack against defended cities in the early game favor this nation. And with organized, after you take a bunch of cities or build a bunch of cities, depends on how the early game goes, you can put down the courthouses very quickly, because not only do you have cheaper courthouses at an earlier tech, but you also have organized for double production speed. So instead of 120 cost courthouses at Code of Laws, like a normal nation has, Sumeria gets 90 hammer courthouses at priesthood. But with Hammurabi as the leader, this is effectively 45 hammers, because he gets double production speed on it. So this is one of the most powerful combinations in the game. Hammurabi leading Sumeria is a particularly powerful unrestricted leader combination. And so if you go into the game, this is the actual name of Grand Admiral Thrawn from Star Wars. I like to play with this name. So Hammurabi of the Sumerians. Now, in order to give myself somewhat of a challenge, I don't want this to be just completely easy. So I'm playing on a higher difficulty than I normally play. I normally play on Monarch, and I win most games, I guess, but it does still give me a challenge if I have a bad start. I'm going to be playing on Emperor, which is substantially harder. I'm going to turn off Raging Barbarians. I was playing with that earlier. Some of these choices for the game setup are worth pointing out. Like, no technology brokering means that you can't trade a technology that you didn't research. Like, if you get a tech in a trade, you can't then turn around and trade that tech with someone else. I'm going to leave all of these in their standard configuration. And I'm going to set resources to balanced. That way we can make sure that all of the capitals in the games get a reasonable distribution of special resources around them. With them set to standard, there's a good amount of luck. And since you can't see the resources around your capital at the start of the game until you get the technologies to reveal them, it leads to some confusion about whether you have a good start. Because you could have bad terrain, but you could have particularly good resources that you can't see. And so setting it to balance makes the game a little more fair. But with them set to standard, you could continue to regenerate the map over and over again until you get a really strong start. Some people do that, but I generally prefer not to. We're playing on a Pangea, which means it's one landmass. Everything's going to be together, so we don't have a bunch of different islands. That naval combat in this game requires a lot of micromanagement. It's fun, I enjoy it, but it's not something that I really want to do for a video. I'm going to set shoreline to pressed. This creates a single landmass, but with multiple different subcontinents that are connected together. Natural creates more random, so you might have like really long peninsulas or really twisted coastlines, and I'm not a big fan of it. I think that the whole point of Pangea is to keep everyone around each other so that there can be a lot of fighting. It turns it into more of a war game. Solid just makes it into a ball, so there's not a lot of choke points and stuff. I think pressed is the best mix between the two, because you can get sort of defensible subcontinents with small connections to the other landmasses, but you still don't need any sort of naval transport to attack another nation. Although it can be advantageous to have boats to transport units from one shore to the other. They move faster than troops overland, or you may have a small bay between two parts of the landmass. I'm going to leave speed at normal. Setting it to epic is better for military conquest because the units are relevant for longer. It slows down technology and production, but combat is at the same speed. Marathon triples the game length, which is really good if you want to conquer the whole world. And quick is about 75% as long as a normal game. I don't know the exact math on quick. Quick is good for multiplayer, but it's too fast for military games because the units will quickly become obsolete. By the time your army gets to the enemy, they've already gotten an advanced technology, and quick really favors the defending player. So let's go ahead and jump into the game. Notice that since it's unrestricted leaders, any leader with any nation, that will also be true of other nations. And so they'll have different combinations of traits and nations that I'll have to adapt to. Some of them are extremely strong. Different nations have different personalities in this game. I do not have random personalities turned on. I like the fact that, like, Gandhi is particularly peaceful and Montezuma is particularly aggressive. But depending on what nation they get, they may be more or less of a threat than in the base game. Their personality is lightly randomized. There's a small random factor involved, but it's not a very big one. So they behave reasonably reliably as you expect. Size is set to large. This does make it slightly more difficult for me because you can have a runaway AI empire that's too far away to fight against. By the time you get to them, they can have a significant advantage, especially on Emperor, which gives them extra tax at the beginning and bonuses to their production, and some penalties from me too as the human player. Let's jump into the game. This is the starting screen. It shows my starting technologies. So here's the tech tree. Different nations have different sets of these 6 technologies. The really good nations tend to start with mining because the most important early game tech is bronzeworking for chopping trees and slavery. And this is also where I get vultures. So I'm going to be beelining for bronzeworking regardless. So we'll see how my surrounding terrain looks in just a second. This is actually not awful. It's not really super good either, but it could be a lot worse. I will immediately start chopping some trees to push out workers as quickly as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to settle on this tile. It's really good to settle on plains hills. Any tile you settle on will give you 2 food and 1 hammer on the city center tile. The only exception is a plains hill, where you get 2 food and 2 hammers. And so I'm going to start scouting with my starting worker. Okay, cows. So I know I want to settle down here. I assume copper should be down here somewhere. But we're going to find out. There is a chance that this hill that I'm standing on with my settler right now is where the copper is going to spawn. And if so, that means it'll be hooked up immediately as soon as I get the tech, which will be really good for me. Actually, moving may not have been advantageous for me because now I can't access this corn tile. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go for a warrior first, a little bit of protection and an extra scout, and my city will grow in 8 turns and my warrior will be done in 8 turns. Depending on the terrain around me, I tend to immediately go for a worker to work the terrain, but in this situation that's not a good play because, well, 2 reasons. One, I have access to a 3 food tile, which is relatively rare, but also with most of the nations that I tend to play, I start with mining, and you can time it so that you get bronze working in 15 turns, and you'll get the worker in 15 turns as well. And so what happens is you end up with the worker coming out on the same turn that it can start chopping down trees, and then you chop trees to speed up the production of your first settler or worker. Here, I have to get mining manually and then get bronze working. But fortunately, since this oasis has 2 commerce on it, my tech speed at the start of the game is faster than it typically is. So this is a decent start, but I need to look around and see what my surroundings look like. Some of this looks really good. There's cows here. Cows are really strong. So I might put a city on this hill that would reach the cow in its initial radius. You see the city can work these tiles around it in a square. Once it gets to 10 culture, it'll grow so that it'll be able to work these 12 around it. It creates a 5x5 square, but it's missing the corners. And it can only work that, what we call a fat cross of tiles. The creative trait that Gilgamesh, the normal leader, gets is really good for this because it means that any city he puts down will pop out to access these extra tiles after exactly 5 turns. With Hammurabi, that doesn't work. Now, because this is my capital, it starts with a palace. The palace has +2 culture, so this city will pop in 5 turns to access the other tiles, but the other cities that I make will not. So like later, when I put a city on this tile, it'll be able to work the cows, which I'll put a pasture on immediately, but it will not be able to work the elephants, at least not until I build a monument and wait for the culture to grow to at least 10 points so that the borders pop out. Let's go through the first couple of turns here. I'll take another look. Excellent, there's another oasis down here, and wheat. So this might be extremely strong. I could settle on any one of these tiles. This is a little further away from my capital, but it might be really good. I might settle here and here, but it's really good. Early in the game, it's really good to have access to fresh water for healthiness in your cities. I'll explain that later once the cities start growing. But if I settled out here, notice I would not be next to this freshwater lake. This oasis does also provide fresh water to the tiles around it, so these are also valid options. But really, these 3 hills here are the best ones I can see so far for my first city. And I'll start exploring this way now. Wow, there's another player right over here. Huayna Capac, I'm not actually super sure how to say that, of the Mongolians. Normally he's of the Incans, who are easily the most powerful nation in Civ 4. I don't really feel like getting into that right now, but trust me, in charge of his actual nation, he has excellent traits, and the nation is really strong. So he's normally a huge threat. I don't know how big of a threat he is as the leader of the Mongols. I'm going to take a quick look at his nation. Oh, wow. Corn and cows. So I might actually settle here. I can't use them in my capital anyway. So I actually should have settled in place. And then I could have worked these two. So moving was a mistake. I'm gonna go for that village. Hopefully he doesn't see it. Okay.
The man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones.
One of my favorite things about Civ 4 is that the quotes are all read by Leonard Nimoy, who's Spock in Star Trek. It's just really nice. I'm going to grab bronze working immediately. I really need to know where the copper is. If I'm going to do a vulture rush, I have to have copper. No. And you can see it's actually a little too fast. I get bronze working in 14, but the worker is going to be done in 10. So I'm going to actually make a warrior first. So I get another scout here. They gave me a map, which is nice. I'll pop this. Here's deer and silver. This would not be a horrible place to settle. You can see the tundra actually provides less food, so it's not great. But with access to the deer and the silver, this would be a tolerable city location. Okay, Pakal of the Spanish. Pakal of the Mayans is actually my favorite nation to play because he gets two really excellent traits, expansive and financial. I'll take a little bit of a look over here. Okay, I'm meeting quite a few players. The AI on Emperors start with like 2 scouts and 2 archers, so they start exploring immediately. And so it can be very difficult to get access to some of the tribal huts because their scouts will get there first. The human player only starts with 1 warrior. If you start with the hunting technology, as some nations do, then you'll start with a scout instead, which moves twice as far. But the Sumerians don't have hunting, so I didn't start with that. Okay, this might be a tolerable start city too. I'm not sure. This is pretty good because it's on a plains hill, which is a good tile, and cows, which are really strong. And it gives me access to 2 different bodies of water. Now this might be a peninsula of some kind, which means that this wouldn't be advantageous. But if this Arctic land right here, so we can see the snow up here, if this goes all the way up to the North Pole, then having a city here would mean that boats can come in this way and out this way. This is probably a peninsula, and this body of water looks pretty small anyway, so that's probably not important, but it can be really nice on some maps. Okay, so lions, 2 attack, 1 movement, just like my warrior. They're approximately the same strength. But being in the forest is giving me a 50% defense bonus. And since I have aggressive, they started with combat 1, so they have plus 10%. So they're effectively 2.6 strength, which should give me a pretty big bonus against them. Now, if I attack them, I don't have a huge chance of winning. I have a decent chance, 73.6%. But if I just fortify here, they'll definitely attack me. Maybe not. I guess they don't want to. I'll move a little closer. The hills are less good for defense, but not horrible, so I'm going to do it. Okay, and my other warrior is done, and I'm going to start my worker. Now, see, on Emperor, their scores start out quite a bit higher, and they're going to continue to grow over the course of the game. So I really need to get my first settler out as quickly as I can. And he did take some damage. It's probably safe to leave him here. But I'm going to stop this video here. This is sort of an introduction to the early part of the game. And I'll come back and play more shortly, and there'll be another video after this one. We'll be expanding, maybe trying to get another city, maybe 2 more cities, as quickly as possible, so that we can start a rush. And we'll see where the copper is once bronze working is done.